Good evening, everybody. I'm Grim Reaper, and with me as always,
Cynical Squid.
and
PerryThePig. Hello.
and tonight we've got EpochBuilds on here with us Dread from EpochBuilds, excuse me, and on last week of Epoch. And I'd like to thank you, Dread, for being our guest again. This is what, third time you've been on the show now?
Third time, yes.
Third time's a charm, right?
Of course.
Now we get to hear your epic rant.
I mean, it's not really like a rant per se. It's just
not a
my
rant.
opinions.
Man, I think it's so funny. You got to know, if you're listening to this on YouTube or Spotify, 10 seconds ago, everybody was rolling with laughter. So we're just like, we're totally calm. We're ready to start the podcast. And we do have a couple things to talk about today. So you'll see that either the title of the podcast, or if you're looking at the middle of the screen here live on twitch.tv/PerryThePig, you'll see that today we're talking about resources. So this was a conversation that came up pretty naturally when we had, I guess Dread and I, you and I were talking on streams, and we were talking about like mana, rage, mana back on crit, mana back on this, mana regeneration, like these different ways to deal with mana in Last Epoch. There's a lot of differences between like this and, the big other game that all of us have played before, Path of Exile. Path of Exile, you get like minus mana cost, you make things free, you get like, mana leech, spell mana leech, you can get, all sorts of things. Mana's complex, but in a different way in Path of Exile. So dealing with the mana systems is one of the big ways in which Last Epoch kind of distinguishes itself. And we've got opinions. We've got things to talk about. So with that preface, Dread, I love hearing your opinions. Tell me, what's on your mind when it comes to a resource management?
Oh, mana. Yeah. So my biggest gripe with mana is there's this I don't know, this kind of discourse in the community on how mana should be, because there's a very big divide between having mana be like Path of Exile, where it's pretty much you set it up and then you forget about it, right, in most situations. Or in the other side of the camp is mana needs to be like this ridiculous, like I have to like use all of my brain power to like concentrate to manage my mana resource every 5 seconds, and then I'm not looking at the screen for 5 seconds and I die to like a AoE or whatever. So it's like that's my biggest pet peeve, is people think like mana can't be fun. And it's like, well, mana can be fun. There are plenty of ways that mana is fun in the game. Like, for instance, the Static Orb build. Perry's been playing Static Orb as well, and so have I. I manage my mana with Static Orb by I stack max mana and then use the negative mana focus thing plus the free spell from Teleport. While Perry, he went with the other route. He went with the Lightning Blast variant, where you cast Lightning Blast to get all your mana back. I think that is how mana should be. Like, it should be intuitive. It shouldn't be like, painful. Like, mana shouldn't be painful. There should not be a moment in the game where you're playing a build and you feel like as though you're having a terrible time because you're not able to use your skills. Because like, everyone wants to use their skills. Everyone wants to have fun, right?
It's an action RPG. I would like to take game actions, please.
Exactly. Yeah. Now, obviously, that doesn't mean there can't be any balance, right? Like, there are some ridiculous mana things that we'll probably end up talking later about, like, that are ridiculous. But that doesn't mean it has to feel terrible. And that's, like, the problem. It's like, people are so focused on, we want mana to feel terrible. And it's like, it doesn't need to feel terrible to be fun. And it doesn't need to be like Path of Exile as well, where it's like all free and stuff. It just needs to be interesting. Like I said earlier with like the Static Orb thing. That's like the perfect example of how something can be interesting. But like, for instance, if you mess up, especially with my setup, like you messed up, you get punished. You know what? That was my fault, because
you kind of SOL for the next 3 or 4, maybe 5 seconds.
Yeah.
You kind of got to back off. You ruined your rotation. You got to start it back up again.
And that's how I set up the build, and that's how I should get punished, right? But it shouldn't be like, oh, I took this one node, and now like this skill consumes my entire mana bar while also doing less damage than a basic attack. You know, that kind of punishment. Forge Strike.
Well, I was gonna ask. So I've been playing the Static Orb build like we just talked about. So my variation is I use the Mana Tunnel node for the free spell. So I teleport. I use a big mana Static Orb that actually costs 0 mana, and then my Lightning Blast refunds the mana cost, which actually just means my mana goes up overall. So if I keep that rotation of like, teleport, Static Orb, and then blast, 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 and then maybe a few more blasts to fill the time or just reposition and stuff, I can have a big mana build that has a mana cost of like 70 or 75 mana, but it feels like super easy to play as long as I keep the rotation up. So Forge Strike, you said Forge Strike is your example of like a skill that just doesn't fit the paradigm well, like doesn't feel good for mana?
Well, the reason why it doesn't fit the paradigm is because, for instance, when you cast Static Orb, Perry, does it do damage? Does it actually
nuclear missile? Yeah, it's so much damage.
When you use mana with Forge Strike, do you feel like as though you're getting compensated for how much mana you're pouring into it?
I have never used Forge Strike like that.
I can tell you right now it's not. I can tell you right now it's terrible.
Yeah.
It is just god awful.
Like, as someone who has played Forge Strike, no, that ability does not do damage for the mana spent.
Obviously, it's fine for the minion version. It's like whatever.
Sure.
But for like the actual damage version, it's like a big problem. Now, what I want to ask you as well, while we're on this topic, Perry, when you do that setup with the lightning blast, the teleport, and stacking max mana and all that, do you feel like as though you have to invest a good majority of your gearing and your time / playtime and all that? Like, do you feel like as though you have to invest to get that? Like in terms of skills, gearing, and stuff like that.
So gearing, I could get more damage multipliers, by stacking up more mana, but I didn't. So I had no gearing investment into it, no skill tree investment into it, no mastery. But my skills, I had 5 skill points invested into Lightning Blast, 5 skill points invested into the Lightning Blast nodes in Static Orb, and then I'm using Lightning Blast, and I specifically make it 0 mana cost so that it feels good. And then I'm also using Teleport in order to get the mana nodes instead of getting, Ward, or instead of getting Elinova procced on Teleport. So there's like a big opportunity cost I'm giving up with like all of my skills and how I'm setting up. And the playstyle too, because I have to play the playstyle in this way.
Yeah. Now let's compare that to a build that literally has all of its mana free for no reason. Like, for instance, probably just in general, like most werebear builds, like not all of them do this. Obviously, the one I just uploaded does not. But like most of them, most of the egregious examples anyways, are utilizing Gardens of Rage when they summon a vine, right? And they get 3 rage per second per vine, right? Now, you've played a version like that, right? Whenever you do that, does it feel like as though you invested to get that? Like, obviously, like you're going to spec into like, Spriggan form anyways. Obviously, you're going to spec into like Fury Leap and all that anyways. But like, does it feel like as though you invested in anything?
Why? I want to answer your question with a different question. Why would you invest into Spriggan form as a werebear build if not for this Garden of Rage stuff?
Well, yeah, in that case, yeah, but like you could use a different skill, obviously. But
yeah,
like,
so I mean, at least there's an opportunity cost. So for the setup that you're talking about, you want like the like you use Fury Leap, what's it called, Maul? You use Maul as a werebear in order to summon vines under your character, and then you have to spec into Fury Leap so that Fury Leap has the vine nodes in it. So you're specking Fury Leap, which is like good, not great. You're specking into Spriggan form, which is like good, not great. And you're probably also taking the Thorn Shield nodes because there's nothing else you can really do. So you're kind of like it. I actually don't mind it from like a skill setup. The big difference for this is like when I was describing Static Orb and the Mana Tunnel and the free skill and like the play style, it influenced my entire play style, and I constantly felt like this is what I'm doing, and it's always at the forefront of my brain, because if I mess it up, I'm going to feel that I mess it up. But like in bear form,
Yeah, that's what I meant. That's what I meant in terms of investment, and like obviously gearing skills and like your gameplay as well as an investment. Obviously.
Zero gameplay investment for werebear stuff.
Yeah, and that's like the stuff that I don't necessarily like, but obviously we've already asked EHG and asked the devs, and they said that they're okay with Gardens of Rage being how it is, which is fine. Like I'm not saying it shouldn't be like that, but it's more of a question of, well, if werebear is going to get free mana, like for instance, on some builds, it is better to just be a werebear, not because like, oh, it has more damage, oh, it's tankier, oh, you're not a shaman. It's literally because you could not sustain that same amount of mana outside of transformation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you're using the transformation because it solves mana.
Yeah, and that's what I don't like about it, is because it's like like for instance, the build that I just uploaded, the Thorn Totem build. So the way you've seen Flintlord playing that build, right?
Is this the exploding upheaval
Yeah, the
Thorn Totem
upheaval
thing
one?
that you're talking about? Okay.
It is legitimately just better on werebear, not because the strength snacking, because he could get as much damage on a shaman. Like it wasn't that. It was nothing like that. The only reason that I was playing a werebear was because it solved your mana problem. That is the only reason. And it's like, I mean, obviously there's a lot of other reasons. That's the main reason. So it's like, that feels terrible. That like this build, the only reason I'm playing werebear is because it solves my mana problem.
So you spec'd into werebear, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
you spec'd into werebear, and then you also, because you had to like connect all the skills together. And then
Oh,
you
no,
also
you were
spec'd
in werebear form. Like you were playing in werebear form, and the rage sustain was better than your mana sustain. So you would use rage sustain instead, because it is literally objectively better than gaining mana as a primalist.
So what about the opportunity cost? What are you giving up in that build by having to spec all of Spriggan form just for vines?
A very slight amount of consistency.
Mainly, like you're giving up like Warcry, maybe? Or
no,
I guess not.
Warcry.
No. Yeah, it's not.
No,
wait, what are you giving up?
No, the only thing you're giving up is you have to proc a Thorn Totem and then explode it with the Thorn Totem on hit. But if you have 20% chance, it's fine. It's like whatever. But it's like you're doing more damage. You're doing like it just feels way better. You're tankier, right? Because you get all this free crit in werebear, so you can use like a rune dagger and a bastion. Flintlord's version could definitely not use that because he had to save so much room for mana. So it's like, that's like one of my problems, is not the fact that like, it's the fact that rage sustain is literally better than mana sustain. And it's like the same thing with Mao a few tournaments ago. He literally spec'd Spriggan form because it solved his mana problem. Not because
I remember that. Yeah,
else.
he was playing a spell EQ human form build. And then what he would do is guzzle all of his mana by just like EQ, tons of damage. And then when he got to 0, he would like flip into Spriggan form, be a Spriggan form for like 10 seconds or so, kiting around. You know, because you have Thorn or Spirit Thorns, which is a spell, it's crit, it's got some overlap with spell EQ. And then like, as soon as he could, he would flip back and then just be a human with, 50 or 60 mana, because that's how the transforms work.
Yeah. Now, the core of the problem with this is not the fact that, like, for instance, those builds are fun. It's fun to invest into, like, Spriggan form just to solve your mana. Like, that's a cool idea. And it's, like, a cool idea to do werebear to gain your mana back, right? Like, these are cool ideas. My problem is, why is mana sustain so bad and terrible in comparison to rage sustain? Like, for instance, if you wanted to have the same, like, for instance, EQ werebear, right, with the earthquake and the entangling roots going off, if you wanted to do that without werebear, you would not be able to do it because you just don't have the investment. Like, you can't, like, you literally could not physically create that much mana. Like, even if you tried to go with, like, a Tempest Strike setup, like, you literally could not beat that. Like, literally. So it's like, it's more like a, why is rage better than mana? Like,
I wanna add my some commentary here. So I recently played a build that I called perfectly or completely normal spell EQ, and it was, you might also know it as like a Kulnavar's EQ or like Numlock Spriggan EQ. It's the thing where like you use Call of Arts and it flicks you back and forth between Spriggan form and human form. That thing is absolutely busted. It should be nerfed for a million reasons. But to me, the best thing about that interaction is that it allowed you to play spell EQ. That's it. It allowed you to play spell. It was the best thing. It was so much fun not using Tempest Strike. I loved it.
Hey.
Yeah.
It was fun. That's like the thing. Like, it was fun playing Werebear and not having to care about my mana. It's fun playing that spell EQ build and swapping to Spriggan form and having all of your mana back. Like, it's fun to do that, but what Isengard just said in chat, if you don't know what he just said, wasn't the whole mana hardship thing thematically intended per the devs that we're literally forced to look other resources that in hindsight are better managed? Well, that's the problem, is because you literally could not do the same thing with mana. It doesn't exist. Like, for instance, Sorcerer has tools to sustain its mana. It has Focus. Obviously, a lot of people don't like Focus. I actually have been liking Focus more and more of late, because if you like, there's a lot more sources of mana with exalted mana rolls and like legendaries, so you can get easily like 1,000 mana, and Focus doesn't feel terrible then, because you're only focusing like every so often. You're not like 40% of 1,000 is 400 mana. It's like, how are you going to blow through that much in like 10 seconds, right? If you're not playing something
It's a
ridiculous.
pretty heavy investment, but I see where you're coming from.
Well,
and then
yeah,
Sorc also has mana refund mechanics.
You can do it. That's what I mean. In Primalist, you literally can't do anything. There's nothing that compares to Rage Gain. So it's like, it's not even the fact that like, oh, Rage Gain is better. No, Rage is the only thing. Because like, you really think we're going to use Tempest Strike? You really think we're going to invest into mana regen and get a piddly like 30 mana regen? When
So
I can
hold
literally
on.
like
We
10
talked
mana on a
about
hit?
we talked about how good the Rage stuff is. So you were comparing your Thorn Totem upheaval thing to a build that Flintler was putting together, and he was playing as a shaman, right? So something that we've talked about time and time again is like, there's a node that just got introduced into the upper half of the Druid tree. If you spec into it enough, it gives you plus base health regeneration, which curiously enough is something that also rolls on gear. You can get base health regeneration on your gear. Go look at a build that uses Manifest Armor, and you'll see that, in order to sustain the Manifest Armor, you put base health regeneration on your own gear, because that gear is used by your Manifest Armor. What if Shaman could have some base mana regen, and he's like the one guy who gets a big payoff for speccing into this? That could be a way, instead of balancing down Rage, you could balance up and buff up some other sources of it.
Yeah, that's what my point was going to go into, was like,
Oh, I stole your thunder.
No, it's okay. It's not the fact that Rage is OP. It's the fact that it's fun, but it's the only way. And it's like, that shouldn't be the case. Like if I wanted to play this build as a human build, I shouldn't feel punished for literally having to just play a worse version of the build because I have to spec into mana stuff. Because mana is so, at a base, without skill interactions or anything, just the base like mana regeneration percentage and all that, it's just garbage. It's just like there's so, like, I don't know. And like, I know that they want mana to be hard and interesting, but isn't it interesting to have to spec Spriggan form and stay in it for 10 seconds to sustain your mana? Isn't that interesting and fun? Like, I find that way more fun than having to put these stupid affixes where damage could be and still not sustain my mana, right? That's my point.
Yeah, I'm with you. This actually kind of sounds similar to a conversation that we had with Lizard IRL on this podcast a couple weeks ago. We were talking about this weird thing that kind of happens where when you're playing a good build, like quote unquote good, when you're playing a synergistic build where everything kind of comes together and your skills have ridiculous more multipliers on them, sometimes you feel like your gear, your prefixes, where your percent increased damage normally would be, maybe I don't care about those percent increased damage prefixes as much. If this is the direction that EHG took, they could make the percent increased damage affixes relatively less valuable, and then maybe buff up the mana regeneration. Maybe they want you to put mana regen on your affixes instead of going from 5,000% increased damage to 5,100. Because in a relative way, that doesn't really matter too much. Maybe.
Yeah, and another point you brought up as well, which I agree with, it's like all the good builds literally either completely remove mana from the equation or mitigate it to the point where it's playable, like the Static Orb build, right? And it's like, well, and he kind of said that as a bad thing. I'm like, well, isn't that you solving the mana problem? That's like the fun part, right? Is solving the mana problem, right? I don't know. That was just like something that was weird to me.
I've got so many things. This is a good topic for a podcast. I've got so many things I want to talk about. I will say, when we're talking about Static Orb, I want to bring this up. Static Orb is nodes on the right side of the tree. It says, when you use Lightning Blast, this thing happens and you refund mana. I wish that it weren't tied directly to Lightning Blast. I wish it said, like, when you use another skill, or when you use a 0 mana cost skill, or when you use something else. So, like, maybe you spec Fireball into having a 0 mana cost, and then all of a sudden you have a Fire Lightning build, and then you can take those Dragon Breath nodes at the top of the Sork tree, and then when you're using Fireball, you're gaining % increased damage so that your Static Orb does, and then you got, like, this whole build. It's like you got more ideas going on there. But the fact that it's hard locked to Lightning Blast, I mean, it's fun, it's good. But as a build creator, I don't have that same that moment where I feel really smart. I feel like the game is being smart for me.
Yeah. And like a good example of how to do that mechanic properly versus how to not do that mechanic properly is to just simply compare Meteor versus Static Orb, because Static Orb has the same kind of idea where you refund mana using a smaller skill, while with like Meteor you use Fireball to do it. But the problem is Meteor is bad and Static Orb is good. And it's like, well, why is Static Orb good? Well, it's like it does damage. That's why it's good. It's like it may like I think part of the mana problem would be solved if things that cost mana actually did stuff. And this is like the biggest problem that I've seen with a lot of these things. It's like they tried so hard to nerf things like Vengeance. And like I don't know if you guys were around, but like 2 years ago, or at least a year and a half, every Sentinel build was like Vengeance, Rive, or like whatever, like the auto attack skills. The reason why that was because Racing Strike and Judgment and Forge Strike were literally not worth their mana cost, because they literally did less damage than, for instance, they literally did less damage than like the auto attack skills. And the reason why that is because, like, if we were to look at something like Static Orb's tree, Static Orb has plenty of damage scaling, right? It has damage scaling through the wazoo. And I've talked about this before about how like damage scaling and more damage modifiers and stuff, but the gist is the more damage modifiers in your tree, the better. But I think that skills that have a higher buy-in, like mana-wise, should just inherently have just better nodes. Like, if you're going to have to spend 40 mana for this Forge Strike, I want it to hit the entire screen and kill everything. Yeah, like, if I'm going to have to pay 100 mana for this Forge Strike, well, obviously it's not that much, but you get what I mean. Like, it needs to feel like as though it's worth casting your skills. And that's why the mana problem feels so bad, is because when you do use that mana, it doesn't feel rewarding because the mana wasn't worth the result. Now, the reason why Static Orb feels good, because whenever you cast Static Orb, it feels worth it because it does damage, because it has damage up the wazoo. It has like just to look real quick here, just for reference. So Static Orb specifically, I believe, has like close to 7 more damage modifiers, not including shock. But if we're to look here, I'm going to type in more in this tree here.
Yeah, as you're counting, I'll point out that the Static Orb build that I played this past weekend had a 1-pointer that gave me 214% more damage.
Exactly. It has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 more damage modifiers, and that's not including shock, which is another one on top, right? Now let's compare that to Forge Strike here, if we're just going to be,
I think I know the answer for Forge Strike off the top of my head. I think it's like,
so if we were to type in more damage, we have 1, 2. That's it. 2.
There's one that
2.
says forged weapons deal more damage.
That doesn't count. That's a whole different build, in my opinion. I'm talking about like Forge Strike crit. Now, my question is, why? Why? It's like because in the game, I know people don't like it when I bring up Path of Exile, right? But this is a perfect Path of Exile moment. In Path of Exile, you have a 6-link with 5 support gems. Each of those support gems gives you a more damage modifier, which is multiplicative with each other. A difference between a 6-link and a 5-link is huge. Well, it's a little less huge because they changed it all and stuff, but stuff like that. Like the difference between a 4-link and a 5-link is the difference between white maps and red maps. It's like, it is absolutely insane, the difference. And Last Epoch follows the same philosophy. A skill that has 2 more damage modifiers will literally brick in corruption, while like a skill that has like 6 or 7, like Static Orb, will just freaking just go to the moon. And I don't know if the devs, if they know that, or like I don't know if it, like, obviously I don't know, I don't work for them, I'm not, I talk to them every so often, but they usually try to avoid me because I ask way too many questions. So it's like is like, do they understand how the more damage modifiers work? Because that is like how you make a skill function.
I
like
want to put in a
damage.
caveat. I assume that, so we're having this conversation during patch 084. Patch 085 is coming out in March, probably 2 or 3 weeks from now. I assume that all of their developmental energy is going toward multiplayer and making sure that the technical launch of that is as smooth as possible. It's like, do they know these things? Yeah, it's very likely they know these things.
Well, no,
but we're still going to talk about it.
No, I didn't mean to be demeaning there. I was just
I'm
just
honest. Making sure, people watch this on YouTube, people watch this on Spotify.
That were designed, a lot of these skills that we're talking about, like Static, for instance. Static hasn't been touched in like 2 years. Like, I'm not saying that like, they haven't been working on it. No, it's just
you mean Static Orb, right? Static Orb?
No, Static. Like Static. But yeah, Static Orb too. Yeah, Static Orb too. But like, as soon as they touch Static Orb hit it out of the park. Like, as soon as they come back and rework these things, most of the time they're an absolute bang, right? Because obviously they, the design from 2 years ago is completely different than now, because Forge Strike was designed for when you did not need that much damage. But now, with the scaling of the game and how you have empowered monoliths and you have stuff like T4 Jurla and stuff like that, now you need the damage. So obviously it's showing its age, and that's fine, but it's good to talk about these things and bring up the cases where, like, for instance, locusts were a good example. The other day, I didn't know if locusts were getting buffed or touched at all, so I made a build about locusts. I was like, hey, like, this is probably kind of like meh. I hope they buff them. Literally the next day on the Reddit post, I got a reply. Yeah, we're buffing them. Thank you for thank you, yada yada yada. Thank you. And it's like that's nice. It's like, that's fine. I'm not saying like, oh, like they have to like stop development to fix this stupid skill that I like. No, I'm just saying that it's like just in general to acknowledge what makes these skills tick so that we can give better feedback. Like, for instance, if we just say Forge Strike bad and we just don't give a reason of why Forge Strike bad, then does that help them at all? Like, when I gave the Locust information, I was like, oh, it's because their duration feels terrible because you invest into their HP and they just die 8 seconds anyways. It's like, I'm hoping that means they might get a duration buff or something with their mechanics will change. But
or just turn them into rates, where as long as they're leeching, they can keep themselves alive.
Yeah, exactly. Like, whatever they need to do, it doesn't matter. It's like their opinion, it's their game, it's like what they want to do. But I'm just saying, like, in the current state, it's not good. And it's the same thing with the mana problem, because with the mana thing, it's like I said, with the skills that they've touched and brought back, like, for instance, Judgment seems worth it for the mana, at least the AoE version, the Consecrated Aura version. I'm not entirely sure about like the big damage hit one, like the one where you like consume all your mana to like do a really large amount of melee damage. I'm going to assume it works. I'm going to assume it does a lot of damage, but the problem is you don't have any AoE, which is a problem with it. But it's like at least it functions and it's fun to play, right? Same thing with a Racing Strike. A Racing Strike doesn't feel terrible anymore because it has enough more damage in its tree to merit costing that much mana.
We talked about Mage having access to Focus, which is one of the, like, you know, pretty convenient, pretty built-in ways to deal with your mana. How would the Sentinel skills that we're talking about, things like Judgment, things like Erasing Strike, how would those work if the mana recovery from Volatile Reversal weren't there? Would those skills be remotely playable if Volatile Reversal didn't have mana in it?
Not in their current state. Judgment would be absolutely worthless because you would skill like 600 mana, you'd suck up all your mana, and then you'd wait there for like 10 minutes waiting for your mana to come back. So it's like reversal is a big part in sustain, but the thing is, if they wanted them to function without reversal, which is what I want them to do, and I know Perry would want them to do as well, like you shouldn't have to use reversal to sustain every single build, right? In Sentinel, kind of like how
there should
don't have to
be
use
like
focus.
two choices. You know, there should be like here's one way, and then here's like the other way.
Well, the thing is, like I said, I think Sentinel's mana gain is fine in terms of like the 0 mana cost spamming and stuff like that. That's fine if the skills were worth casting in the first place. It's like, if the skills were actually worth casting, then you wouldn't have to, like, for instance, if I did like 1, 2, 3, 4 attacks with like Vengeance, but then like I did a Smelter's Wrath kind of AoE, and it did a significant portion of damage and actually killed things, I would be okay. Because this, look at Flame Reeve and Firebrand Flame Reeve. That feels worth it to do the 1, 2, 3, 4. But you're obviously not doing mana, but like it's the same concept. Instead of having all those more damage modifiers, they're just built into the skill, and the skill just costs mana. And
that's a great comparison. Like Flame Reeve and Firebrand. It's not a mana thing, but you know, it kind of is. It kind of has like the same kind of paradigm to it.
Yeah, it doesn't have to like if they want things to be gated by mana, then these things need to be worth the mana. Like for instance, when I do the 1, 2, 3, 4 and do it, it should feel good. When you do that with Forge Strike, it doesn't feel good. Like for instance, there's a setup with a Forge Strike where you can use Javelin. You cast Javelin, and it makes your next attack subtract like 20 less mana or whatever, right? And it's free. The next Forge Strike is free. The problem is you do it, and it does like 2k damage, and you're just sad. And it's like
your Javelin probably did more damage than that.
Yeah, it's like it's not fun. It's like it's not fun at all. But if it was like if I did that and it did a lot of damage, like in Judgment's case, or it just had a big AoE in terms of like Smelter's Wrath, like in my humble opinion, Smelter's Wrath is more playable than Forge Strike in terms of the crit version or the bleed version, just because at least Smelter's Wrath does something.
I think Smelter's Wrath is really close to being like a popular skill.
It needs like those nodes that give it increased damage, it needs to be more damage, and it would be fine. It would just be fine. Also, did you know that Smelter's Wrath does not have the added damage effectiveness like all the other big skills do? Like Forge Strike and all that? That surprised me, because it's like
it doesn't have increased effectiveness added damage?
Yeah, it does not. It's the same effectiveness. Yeah, it's just 100. And it's like, it surprised me because I'm like, I'm doing more damage with Smelter's Wrath than I am with Forge Strike. But its Forge Strike has 400% added damage effectiveness. And the reason why is because it only has 2 more damage modifiers in its tree, while Smelter's Wrath has a few more. Especially because it's inbuilt with the skill, because you charge it and it has more damage, and you have the more damage at the top and stuff like that. So that's why it performs better. Also, as well, it's okay for a skill to do less damage on a single target if it has a bigger AoE, right? Obviously, right? Like, for instance, Static Orb isn't like obviously it can do single target, but the reason why you use Static Orb is because it literally annihilates the screen in front of you, right? That's why you use Static Orb. So it's like, it doesn't have to be damage for it to do, it just has to do something. Like, for instance, if there was a node in Forge Strike that like made the thing cost 100 mana, but when I use it, it spawned all 12 of my forged weapons instantly with no problem, I would do that instead. I would literally make the build built around building up to 100 mana just to be able to do that. Because you know what that would do? It would make the build feel better, and it would make it feel good when that happens. Like the feedback of something feeling good. Like for instance, when you judgment, suck up all your mana, and then reversal, obviously, because who wants to wait 6 years for their mana to come back? It feels good because the judgment aura is so insanely strong because it gives you HP back, it gives you damage, and of course, if you do like the meme judgment build where you just do as much damage as possible, you do damage. So it's fun. And it needs to have like a feedback loop where it's like when you do big dumb things should happen. And Forge Strike doesn't, do that. And Erasing Strike used to not do that either, but now it does because it does damage.
How do you feel about like maybe like the balance or the prevalence or where these things show up of mana regeneration as opposed to like mana refund or like mana on hit, that kind of way of sustaining the resource?
Mana regen? I think mana regen should be fine. Like I think base mana regen needs to be introduced, but in like small quantities in places. Like for instance, those sapphire rings, instead of giving you increased mana regen, they could just give you 2 base mana regen.
That
would be
fine. That would be an incredible change. That sounds really good.
And like you have to sacrifice your ring prefix and implicit, and those are insanely strong. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
So what I was going to ask you is, so far it seems like the theme of things that we're talking about that have mana issues seems to be the Sentinel class specifically, because whenever we start talking about Mage, we start talking about ways to get mana back. And with the Sentinel, you started talking about volatile reversal as a way of getting mana back. Was there any other ways that you've found with Sentinel to circumvent mana issues? Because I have seen, like, they got the one thing where you can get Rive, what is it, 6 mana on hit with Rive or something like that?
Yeah.
For the chess piece. There's other things out there to get mana back, but as far as your builds go and stuff like that, those aren't viable options within those, correct?
They can be. Like I brought up with the Firebrand Flame Reef thing, if Forge Strike did the same kind of thing that like Flame Reef did, then it would be fine. The problem is, like I said, you build up that Rive build, use Rive for your mana or whatever, right? Because it has inherent attack speed and it's really strong for getting mana back because it's quick. And then you turn off the third strike, so you're just like bam, 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 bam. You got your mana back, and you can do it without having to hit things. That would be fine if when you spent the mana, it didn't feel like you wasted the mana.
Yeah, just like the damage output. This reminds me, we actually had a Sentinel tournament pretty recently, and so we're late patch 084, so people are trying weird things during the weekend tournaments. Somebody was trying to build a like 2-handed melee, big crit, no cooldown Forge Strike build, and they were using tons of attack speed on Vengeance because Vengeance also gives you some defensive modifiers in it. And they were trying to use, Vengeance as the mana battery, and then crit Forge Strike with no cooldown as the mana consumer. And they were like pushing Arena like that. They got like 250 waves or something. But I don't know. It seemed like an interesting thing to try out. But like you said, Dread, the payoff's got to be there. You need you need some more damage multipliers.
Well, I think bleed Forge Strike, if you did it like that, could be there, but like not crit. Crit would not be there at all. Because bleed has enough, like you can just use use all the overpowered bleed stuff and you'd be fine.
As long as the build's OP, everything's fine.
No, it just needs to feel good to play. Like for instance, this is actually a good example. It's like everyone's like, oh, the build's OP. That's why it feels good to play. I'm like, there are plenty of builds that aren't OP that just feel good to play that like people have fun with. Like for instance, for reference, speaking of one of the builds that Perry and I have both played and have both loved is Cold Dot Werebear. Cold Dot Werebear does like 100k DPS on the dummy. It is like one of the most like ZDPS builds I have ever showcased on the channel, I think.
But it's so fast and it's so much fun to play.
And it has so much quality of life.
That's great.
And it does things when you press the buttons. It feels amazing, but it doesn't have to be OP. It just has to feel good, right?
Yeah, I'm with you there. Hey, so we're talking about like mana refund, mana on hit, maybe like Marksman builds like that, maybe mana on crit, which I think is only on Void Cleave in the entire game.
Yeah.
What about one of the new unique items that was relatively recently introduced to the game? have you done anything with a Jewelra ring that has exalted mana regen on it?
So I had one build planned. There was only one idea I have ever had with that ring. And the idea was to play self-cast Maelstrom and use that ring. The problem is what are you going to use? Fury Leap to proc it? In that case, it would be fine if you didn't have to use Fury Leap.
True. What was I thinking about recently? I was thinking about like, I think, oh, you know what? I was thinking about like a Jewelra theme build. Something where you use the Jewelra helmet, Jewelra ring, Jewelra gloves, Jewelra relic as well. And I was like, oh man, spell EQ would be perfect for that. You know, you get stun chance from the helmet, stun duration, like you use all the different components. And I was thinking like, you know, you can use the ring, you just use a movement ability. Wait. Your movement ability is Fury Leap. It's like, okay, well maybe scratch that.
Yeah. The Jewelra ring would be even more interesting if, like I said, the supposed buff to like this to the Sapphire ring, which is the base of it, would be 2 base health mana regen. Could you imagine how insane that would be? That would actually make them worth using.
Yes.
Now
like
the problem
one
with
LP would be
rings,
like not weird, and then 2 LP would be like, oh my god, like you would want to farm up a 2 LP ring.
Yeah. Like the Jewelra ring would be amazing. Like if it had a different proc instead of just your movement skill, because there are a lot of situations where I could use a Jewelra ring, but I don't because I'd have to use a movement skill. It's either I use my movement skill too much in terms of like Sentinel, or I don't use it at all because I'm a primalist. So it's like, it's just kind of like, I don't know. Like I think they can just change the proc of that and it'd be fine.
I just realized right now that Void Cleave's Ravaging Aura is a spell damage. It's void spell damage over time, and Void Cleave is a movement skill.
Oh my god, you just figured it out.
Oh my, I didn't even realize this until now.
But then you like lunge and then you lose the buff. Then you lunge and then you lose the buff though.
It's fine. Details. This is details.
Just don't
You're worrying too much.
Don't use lunge. It's fine.
No, you see, no. This is technology for single target damage.
It's okay. They nerfed lunge. It's okay.
You're worrying too much. Don't worry.
Like speaking of builds that did mana in a feels good way in comparison to Static Orb, is I was playing the Void Knight build, the Void Knight Warpath build. I showed you this, I remember, on stream. The one that like uses all of its mana. That's what I mean in terms of if you're using all your mana, it should actually do something kind of thing. Like that was like doing a lot of damage, but obviously if I messed up once, I'd be at 0 mana, right?
Can you tell us about that build real quick? In case someone hasn't seen
it? The idea of it is you use Warpath and you don't spec into any of the minus channel cost stuff because you don't need to, and you just go into Warrior's Fury, which what it reads is it gives you more damage and increased area per second of channeling Warpath, but it flat increases its mana per second, like a flat amount. So as you're channeling, you get bigger and deal more damage, but it costs more and more mana. Now, back in the day, like a few months ago, before I knew about this interaction, I tried it with a physical crit one, and it was okay. It didn't like do the best at all. But then what you would do is you would get enough mana to sustain the big AoE for 4 seconds, and then use reversal to reverse yourself back in 4 seconds to get all your mana back. And then then you just keep attacking, reversaling. And since you could only sustain 4 seconds of the channel cost, you would never mess up your reversal because your mana cost would be your own timer. And the build felt amazing to play. The Fizz crit one was a little less amazing to play because, I don't know, for some reason they decided that Fizz damage wasn't a thing for Sentinel, even though it's supposed to be one of their biggest things, but whatever. Then I tried the Void version. Well, Void. It's like Fizz and Void. But I tried the Fizz and Void version, and oh my god. Like, if we're going to talk about, like, how you're supposed to use reversal, that is, like, the most, like, kosher reversal use I have ever seen. And, like, actually using it how I imagined the devs intending it. Like, it felt amazing. And that is what I like. You were doing like 200, like you can get up to 300k crits with Warpath, right? Like per hit, and you hit like 24 times per second. But it had a big cost. It took your mana. It took you like how Perry was talking about with the Static Orb build, how he had to use the lightning blast. It was always at the forefront of your mind. That rotation was the same thing with the Warpath build, right? And that is what I mean by like it needs to do something to merit the mana cost. Like it is an insane channel cost because it gets up to like 80 channel cost per second without the channel cost helm. But it does damage and it has a big AoE, so it does its thing and it does it well. So it does not feel bad when you use up all that mana.
Let's touch on mana gain on hit, because as long as we're talking about resources, we need to talk about Marksman, because Marksman almost the entire identity of Marksman is jacking up the mana cost of a big mana something, detonate arrow, hail of arrows, something, and then
Marksman,
and then using a different skill like puncture or detonating arrows spect for mana gen, so that you can have like a mana, like a battery and spender, in order to like make your whole playstyle work. Are you a fan of that? Do you like not worrying about mana regeneration for these particular builds and having the generator spender into it?
I think it's a very interesting setup, because you have a lot of interesting things you can do with that. Like for instance, the node that increases bow mana cost, but then gives you flat mana on hit. That one's a very interesting node because you can either go full blow on the mana cost and just have a really big mana cost, or you can go with sources of minus bow mana cost, like inside multi-shots tree, or with like draw cores, and get multi-shots mana to like 2, and then when you have like 200% times 2, it's 6. It's like whatever, but then your puncture gives you like 20 mana back. That's a cool dichotomy alongside the big mana version. And I think I like that. I like how Marksman is in terms of mana. And it kind of fits the rogue playstyle. I don't think rogue should have to deal with mana as much versus the other classes. I think that should be its like, because it's all about attack speed. It's all about dealing like I don't think like you have like if you've ever played a rogue, I'm sure a lot of you have, most of the time you don't have the time to be thinking about trying to make sure your mana is okay, because you have like 20 other actions to do.
And
like,
you also need to worry about only having 1500 life because gearing is so difficult.
Yeah, rogue has already enough on its plate, so like giving free mana is like okay. It's like, and it's interesting enough where it's not just like you can't just like go out of your way. Like you can't just like trivialize the whole system. You have to invest into it. You have to invest into an LP draw core. You have to invest into mana gain. Like you have to like do all this to do it. And it's fine. Like when you have to invest something to make the build feel good and trivialize mana, it's fine. It's just when you trivialize mana for free. Now, I'm going to bring up something that
I want to bring up something too.
Oh,
you want to go first?
Oh, go right ahead.
I'm going Cynical Squid, you, I'm gonna feel embarrassed if I'm wrong. You play League of Legends, right?
I do.
I think you and Grim both play League of Legends.
Yes.
And unfortunately, regrettably, I used to play League of Legends. This conversation sounds so similar to back in season 3, 4, and 5 when this is what people talked about. Is like
height of my league powers.
Is top laners who are like gated by cooldowns, like something like Riven, right? Or something like Zed, who is not particularly good at top lane, but like you could build him like a bruiser and he had energy on him. So like these like cooldown gated, 0 mana cost, energy gated champions, as opposed to things that had to start the game with a Doran's Ring or a mana pot or crystalline flask or whatever you do in League of Legends these days, Zoomers. But like having this like comparison with like what's the trade-off for me needing to like build mana on this character, and what is the penalty that a free mana cost or a free like cooldown gated champion needs to do instead. This is like, I love this conversation. It's so good.
It does feel very similar, and those top laners were pretty much the best things you could be doing at the time, because much like last Epoch, currently League of Legends was going through a phase during that where they didn't really know how to balance mana skills that weren't on obvious like mages. So like your mid laners, like a lot of their stuff was like really well costed, but a lot of the people that used mana that were considered like top lane bruisers and stuff had really wacky mana costs that made a lot of them not fun to play, and well, obviously not meta viable either when you have like Garen up top who has no mana and is just running around spinning and killing everything.
All right, so we've got people in Twitch chat who are talking about playing Season 3 Kennen as a top laner. So I'm having flashbacks here. We're going to abandon this conversation. I don't want to talk about Season 3 Kennen top lane. All right, Dread, what do you want to talk about? You had a topic for us.
The last thing I have on my mind was the conversation we were having about how you were talking about, like, why are you so butthurt about Lich? And I'm like, well, let me explain why I'm butthurt about Lich. So how Focus has that setup where if you're at negative mana or whatever, you're missing mana, you gain more mana back and you can invest into max mana, and that's like a way of sustaining mana that doesn't feel terrible. Well, Lich used to have that. It used to have that with Transplant. Transplant used to give you, I think, it was a decent amount. It was like 13%. It was even more than that, I think. It was a good amount. But like you didn't get as much as Focus, but Transplant was like on a less of a cooldown, so you could spam it more and you can gain your missing mana back. So the idea was you would spam cooldown and you'd get a bunch of flat mana, and that made mana builds on Lich that cost a lot of mana to spam stuff like Soul Feast and stuff. That's how the old Soul Feast builds used to work. And that's how you would sustain Drain Life. Drain Life used to be usable outside of the stupid, the minion thing. We're ignoring that. We're ignoring that for this conversation. But
so when you and I first had the conversation about Lich, you were saying like, Lich builds that want to use mana. And my brain, that's only been playing last Epoch for about a year at this point, all of the skills cost 0 mana. Every Lich skill, every good Lich skill,
there you go.
Costs 0 mana, or it costs life.
I know it sounds crazy.
It does sound. You're telling me that you can play skills that cost mana on a Lich? You used to be able to
play Soul Feast and deal damage.
That sounds like a bad build video. I don't know about this one.
He used to like Mao here. He knows. You used to use mana on Lich, right? Back in the day, like 2 years ago, right? It's like, that's like the thing. Like, let me go look at Lich here. Let me.
So while you're pulling that up, I'll talk about my experience from 2 weekends ago. I was playing a Necromancer, and for some reason, I also enjoyed it. The reason might be that it's the highest damaging build that I've ever played, and it was completely busted. But I did enjoy playing a minion build, so I'm going to cross that one off my checklist. I was using Transplant in order to gain mana on Transplant. And I gained like 20 mana or something like that. And it wasn't OP, but it felt good. I've never taken those mana generation nodes before. Apparently, those nodes used to be a lot better, huh?
Yeah, they were. It wasn't even like that. That's like the problem, is it wasn't even like a nerf kind of thing. It was just a removal. Like, it doesn't even feel like a nerf. It just feels like as though, like, imagine if you took Mage and just removed Focus. Like, that's all you did was just remove Focus and then play Mage. And it feels terrible, right?
That's such a good comparison. Focus used to be like 3 or 4 times as good.
Yeah.
And in order to like restore your mana, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It used to be, well, the normal version, if that makes sense. Like, for instance, you used to not have to build into max mana to gain ridiculous mana gained with Focus before. You used to just be able to channel Focus and get a bunch of mana. You didn't have to like do all this shenaniganry with stacking max mana.
Was it a flat mana increase that it used to be?
Oh, I'd have to go back, but
don't worry. It's too much thinking.
I thought it was a flat % at the start of the channeling, and then after that, it would increase your regen afterwards.
Yeah, it's something. Yeah, it is.
But it used to be more on the flat, didn't it? Wasn't it like 60% of your max mana on the flat as a burst, and then they dropped it down to 40% or something like that?
60?
Yeah, it was way better.
You used to get 60%? I would even use it. Holy moly, okay.
It was like way better. It was usable. Like Mao, there you go, Mao. That was the biggest one. The CD. Yeah, that's cooldown. That's what changed it. The cooldown. Yeah, I remember now. That's what changed it, was putting a cooldown on it. Yeah, I remember that. But like I said, focus is still used. It's not like as if it's bad, but but it's like, but this is like a completely different thing in my opinion, because like the mana removal from like the transplant thing, it removed an entire way of sustaining mana. Like imagine if you took like Sentinel and like, you know, like how you gain mana on like reversal. Imagine if you just remove that. Imagine how many builds you just killed, right? It's kind of like that, where it's like they didn't nerf it. They didn't nerf the mana gain. They just removed it. So now it just doesn't, it isn't possible anymore, right? Like for
So
instance, there would
now
be
volatile reversal only quadruples my damage, but it doesn't also fix my mana. This is a pain in the butt. I don't like this anymore.
I'm talking, that's that's the unkosher part. I'm talking about the kosher nice part, okay? All right. But yeah, that was like that was like the problem with that. Cuz like have you played Drain Life? I think you have, haven't you? Haven't you played the Drain Life where
I
you play
did
it?
use Drain Life as necrotic damage, and then while Drain Life was active, my post nerf Wandering Spirits were also dealing necrotic damage. I was doing an extremely kosher build. It was garbage.
No, I was talking about like Dark Shackles, like the 60 mana flat node. Like have you played with that yet?
What? What?
Oh, the way you Drain Life, you turn off the channeling and then you like get the 60 mana flat on it and you can just place it down on the ground.
Oh yes, that's exactly what I
That used to be like way more playable when you could get a missing amount of your mana back instead of like just a flat amount. Because like imagine every single time you transplant, you gain like 40 to 50 mana instead of just 10 or 20, right? It was like completely different, and you could actually legitimately play it and feel good. Because the reason is because since it was missing mana, it counted negative mana. So you could be at negative 60 mana and get even more mana back because of that, which would make playing Drain Life feel way better because, oh boy, I just put my Drain Life down at negative mana. Oh wait, I transplanted and now I'm back at full, like I'm back at mana. And it was the same thing with Soul Feast and stuff. And but in my opinion, I really think EHG is doing itself a gigantic disservice in terms of Lich and like Acolyte and stuff. I am surprised at the lack of skills that use your HP as a resource. All we have is like transplant, right? And like Drain Life, but like nobody ever plays it that way, so it doesn't matter.
Marrow Shards does a tremendous amount of damage, but it
Yeah.
also has the nickname of Narrow Shards for a reason. Yeah.
Kind of like, you know, Rip Blood, Bone Curse, you know, like all these other stuff, like Soul Feast. Like imagine if Soul Feast consumed your life to give you ward, right? Like imagine if Drain Life, well, Drain Life does that, but like, you know, Drain Life has other problems, including mana. Like imagine instead of Dark Shackles reading Drain Life on cast, it costs like 60 mana. Imagine if it just costs like 60 flat HP or like 100 flat HP on cast. Like imagine if it was like that. Now, could you imagine like the dichotomy that would be there? You couldn't go too low on Drain, like you couldn't go too low on Death Seal because it's a flat mana cost and you'd kill yourself, right? But you could also like there's ways you could get around with that, right? But with just a flat mana cost, it just feels terrible because Lich doesn't have any ways of gaining back mana.
Before we get too far away from this, you started talking about negative mana, and there's always one of those moments. So like I guess all four of us here, we stream. You always have a moment where like a new Last Epoch gamer comes into your stream and they're like, "Hey, I'm level 10. I'm checking out this game for the first time. How's your stuff?" And then they watch your mana go negative for some reason, and their mind just that it's such a good moment. Whenever EHG does something that interacts with negative mana, I played a devotion build recently. It's like a devotion smite build, and you want your mana to be negative. It's like, this is so cool. I love this. It's unique to EHG. You know, it's like it's unique to Last Epoch. It's got like its own flavor, its own mechanics to it. I love that kind of stuff. I would love to see more of it.
I want a skill that literally does, like, you know how like Static Orb has that line on it where it does more damage per flat mana it costs. I want a skill that literally does more damage per point of mana you're down below negative. Obviously, there would have to be a lot of like balanced stuff. You couldn't print it on Primalist because Primalist can get to like negative 400 mana very
I was gonna say
quickly.
you could be triple
Yeah.
negative mana on on one of the avalanche.
You would
builds.
they would probably have to cap your negative mana, but that's like the thing is like that's why I like this game so much is because there is the possibility that that could happen. Like that is like in theory something possible, right? Because like for instance, I didn't think that they were ever going to release anything that was akin to Static Orb and mana stacking. Same thing with Judgment. I didn't think they were going to add anything like that, and they did. So I was proven wrong. And those are like the interesting things that make the game fun. But then you have something like Forge Strike that just hits like a wet noodle and costs a lot of mana.
Poor little Forge Strike.
Do you have one last topic you want to touch on, Perry?
You know what? We've said that we are very close to patch 0.85. So we're currently on patch 0.84. We got a multiplayer update yesterday talking about what's going on in the future. Patch 0.85 is probably 2 or 3 weeks away at this point. It's going to be like at some point in March 2022. We got 2 more dungeons coming up. Dread, we haven't talked about speculation yet. And I love speculation. So one dungeon is going to have some kind of reward system called the Vault of Uncertain Fate. And the other dungeon is going to have some kind of reward system called the Soul Gambler. Give me the hottest of takes. What's the Soul Gambler going to be? Let's do that one first.
The Soul Gambler? Soul Gambler. I think it's going to be the first introduction of a money sink in last Epoch. I think so. Shoot, it's not. I'm trying to think. Yeah, so in the game called Gunfire Reborn that we've been playing, they have a shopkeeper called like we call him Kermit because he looks like Kermit the Frog, but then there's Soul Kermit. And the way Soul Kermit works is he has like a secondary resource that you can spend on the shop. Gunfire Reborn is like a roguelike, you shoot stuff like that. But you have like a shop you can buy stuff in. I think the Soul Gambler is just going to be the gambler, but instead of trash items, it would give you good items.
He gives you he gives you exalted items?
You could gamble exalted items. You could gamble.
You could gamble to get like a specific base. Like you really want like exalted Heoborian boots, so you gamble on the Heoborian boot.
Or you could gamble for uniques, like before, but now you can do it there instead. And the gold prices should be absolutely ridiculous, obviously, because other than making stash spaces, right? There's no point in going to all those gold nodes, right? There's no point. So that's what I think is just going to be a much stronger gambler. But the thing is, you're only going to have like a certain amount of rerolls or something, or it's going to have like a limited amount because what's the point in doing the dungeon over and over again?
This sounds like using the rerolls during Expedition League in Path of Exile.
Yeah,
you got like some similar vibes going on. Okay.
Yeah, it would be like that. Yeah, it would be like that.
I want to say,
Ritual. Ritual is a good example. I think Ritual is a good example.
Before I ask about the second dungeon, in terms of gold in last Epoch right now is balanced pretty well for a weekend tournament because it feels substantial. It feels like you want to use it for gambling. There are times when you run out. You don't always have the crafting materials you need. You want to buy Runes of Shattering. For those like first, maybe even the first half of a weekend tournament, the gold actually feels like something that has weight to it, something that feels substantial. Beyond that, it disappears.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, so how about the other dungeon? We said Soul Gambler, and the other one's going to be
Vault of Uncertain Fate.
Yeah, go ahead.
That's just going to be like, what's that? That's that old TV show, the one where it's like the bunch of doors and you open the doors and it's like what's behind the door number 1 or whatever. I can't remember it's like a game show. It's like what's behind door number 1. It's a brand new
You think they're
car.
going to show us door number 1 and give us the option to switch or stay?
something like that. I don't know.
I love it.
Calls them Vaults of Uncertain Fate. So it's either going to be something like the end room in the Labyrinth of Fate. Oh my God, I'm tired. The Labyrinth from PoE.
Yeah.
Or it's going to be that, where it's like, yeah.
If the future dungeons that get implemented into Last Epoch are nothing but a loose rebranding of like 90s daytime game shows, I'm in. That sounds awesome. I will do every single dungeon. I love it. Give me the prices right after I kill Julra.
I mean, wouldn't that feel like an amazing
That'd be cool.
for like the Soul Gambler one? Like you finish the dungeon and like you finish the like. Imagine if it was like Ritual, right? Now imagine if you went into the from Path of Exile. If you don't know Path of Exile, the way the Ritual works, to put it in Last Epoch, terms, you would go into a monolith or whatever, or a map. You would kill stuff in the ritual, and you would get a certain amount of ritual currency.
And it would incentivize you to full clear the echo, which we don't currently have.
It would incentivize you to kill stuff. Well, but it would be different because it would be self-contained. Because you'd have the dungeon, and in the dungeon, the Soul Gambler, that's the reward. But the more you killed in the dungeon, or if you did things in the proper way, or whatever, if you played the mechanic right, you'd get a certain amount of like soul points or whatever, and that would be the currency you gamble with the Soul Gambler with. So depending on how well you performed in the dungeon, right? Because like right now with Jurla, we just rush to Jurla, right? Like obviously some people they will full clear zones. But some people
again for the weekend tournament. Every Last Epoch is balanced so well when it comes to weekend tournaments.
I know.
It's like you go to tier 3 Julra and you don't kill the boss. You just full clear the entire thing, looking for enemies drop exalted relics.
But I mean in general though, like you would go and do the Soul Gambler. You would do the mechanic in the dungeon up to the boss, and then after you kill the boss, you use those soul points to. Like, for instance, you know how, like, Azaro, if you, like, buff him up, you'd get more keys? It'd be like that. But instead, you would just, get more points to spend at the Soul Gambler, and you can use a certain amount to reroll, and it would give you a list of items. It would show, like, a buying screen, like a shop, but it could have, like, Lists of Despair. It could have Affix Shards. It could have, like, it could have LP uniques that aren't boss drops. It could have just uniques in general, like a Ravenous Void. It could have, it could have Glyphs of Despair. Like, it could have anything. Like,
the comparison you made to Azaro and like the dungeon in or what's it called, Lab in Path of Exile, is great. Like you can blitz the boss and you get 1 box and 1 enchant, or you can like do all the other content in the dungeon and then you get like 4 boxes and 2 enchants. That's a good comparison. I like it.
Where are you going to say? The Vaults of what?
Oh, I was talking about the Soul Gambler.
No, what's the Vault's name again?
Oh, Vaults of Uncertain Fate.
I'm wondering if maybe they might have it to where it can drop legendary items that already have stuff on them at the end.
That could be cool. Ooh, yeah, that could be cool.
Where they already, yeah. Actually, I kind of like that.
That should be really sick.
Because then, like, it's a legendary item, but like it's also kind of bad because it's already been made for you. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Sure.
And maybe the Vaults of Uncertain Fate, the way they would work is it's the same kind of mechanic where the more you clear in the dungeon or the more you do, or you get keys, like whatever, get keys to open the chest at the end. But the chest would have like nodes on it that says this chest drops a random, unique that has LP but it's already legendary, or like this one drops glyphs and could have a high possibility of Ghosts of Despair. So you get to choose your rewards, and it's like in a room, and there's a certain amount of it. So you have to like pick and choose what you want. That would be okay. It would be a little too much like Labs, so they'd have to like kind of like mess around with it.
Deal. Sign me up.
The last thought I had on the vaults too, and this idea came from looking at some of the set items. Some of the set items don't have a whole lot of affixes on them. They might have 1 or 2 good affixes, but then the rest are crap on them. Maybe we can upgrade our set items to make them like legendary set items, to give more affixes to make the sets more usable in late game.
Yeah. What if set items weren't bad?
Just in
Well,
general.
I
Hmm.
like Perry's idea with the set items where they're just innately powerful at the start, but it's because you can never upgrade them.
Yeah.
Technically,
What we said, like the Corsair helmet has
Yeah.
bleed effect and block effect increase on it. Like, it's a good item. It's not good because
Or
it's a
like-
set of something. It's just an independently strong item.
or like
And
how the
it's-
Gaspar's helm has increased freeze rate multi, which should
That
be toned down.
increased freeze rate multi on the Gaspar helm is confirmed to be a bug. It will
Oh,
be
it
addressed.
is. Oh, they
Thank
confirmed
you
it?
very much.
Hey, I asked a question. I got it confirmed. Woo! No, I agree with Haxel there. They shouldn't make set items. But I'm going to be honest, they could double or triple the power of set items right now, and they would still not be enough to like turn the game into D3.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. Is like if they made the set items just equipable past like level 50, it would be a buff.
like for instance, the Shattered Lance set. Don't get me wrong; it's a really fun set to play around, but it isn't amazing.
All right,
Like,
if you're really gonna twist my arm, if you really want to do another podcast in the future talking about set items, I guess we will. Fine. But you know what? I think we're a little bit over the top of the hour at this point. I think we've got some pretty good content, and I specifically like this. Man, whenever we stay on topic for the whole hour or so of the podcast, and we're just like drilling into one topic, talking about all the different ideas that come to mind, I love it. This is exactly the kind of podcast that I want.
I was like thinking back over the last hour. I was like making sure. I'm like, did we? I'm like, yeah, we did.
Yeah, we
Other
did.
than the League of Legends thing, Cap. But no, I'm joking.
Oh, my bad.
I'm memeing. It's whatever. I'm just joking.
All right, guys, that's going to do it for all of us here at Last Week at Epoch. I'd like to thank you again, Dread, for being our guest. From all of us here, we'll catch you in the next one.